First of all, the flood was a catastrophic event and a mixing of ecosystems in many areas of both plant, marine, and terrestrial animals together. Right there, I showed you that most of the fossil graveyards are not strictly just all terrestrial animals, land animals, period. They are mixed up.
A major objection in light of the evidence for catastrophic processes in the past even formed these trillions of fossils in the first place, and the evidence that we have for these massive stretches of sedimentary rock layers that extend over entire continents. We have fossils, marine fossils in landlocked areas that are far from any body of water, all indicating a worldwide flood. They will object to this evidence, and they'll point to the ordering of the fossil record, Sal. And so I'd like us to interact with this objection for a little bit. I have some points and sources as well that I'd like to pull up. But they'll basically argue that, well, what we have in the fossil record going from the deepest layers to your layers at the top, you have a series, according to them, this is their assertion, although in your presentation you demonstrated a series of mixed environments put there through catastrophic processes. But they'll say what we see is a series of evolutionary history, from simple organisms to more complex organisms. You got bacteria, let's say, at the bottom layers up to fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and then eventually humans. They'll challenge us by saying, why don't we find dinosaurs, let's say a T-Rex, mixed with a creature like an elephant, a modern mammal? Or why don't we find humans and dinosaurs together? Why does the fossil record, according to them, look like a long history of evolutionary change? And so, Sal, in your opinion, what's the best way to engage that objection put forth by an evolutionist?
Well, I could understand why people would present that as a possible objection because of what you have been not told, what you have not been told, what you have been deceived into thinking about the time factor. Number one, the time factor just isn't there, as we particularly showed in the last session that we did, that the time factor, as supposedly, quote unquote, proven by radioisotope absolute dating, and we showed that that is a dating game which is totally unreliable. So the time factor is not there. But I can understand why they would think that there is a order in the fossil record, and there is an actual order, but it is nowhere near as complete or in a proper order as is shown in the fancy geologic diagrams, the evolutionary phylogenetic tree, the geologic column, like I showed you, pictures of various fossils up through the record. That order is not as orderly and as regular as presented in these images and such. Okay. Now there is somewhat of an order, and that's what we would expect. First of all, the flood was a catastrophic event and a mixing of ecosystems in many areas of both plant, marine, and terrestrial animals together. Right there, I showed you that most of the fossil graveyards are not strictly just all terrestrial animals, land animals, period. They are mixed up. with various ecosystems. And we expect that because as the waters rose, and this is shown from a geology standpoint by geologists worldwide, but as the waters rose higher and higher on the earth, they progressively buried the various ecosystems. So, of course, we're going to find the marine organisms at the lowest part or in the earliest sediments to accumulate under the oceans and the water. They were buried first, and they represent 90% of all the fossils on the earth. Okay, and then as the ocean waters rose up, they started to bury progressive ecosystems. First, your marine animals. Okay, then you get to your amphibians near the near shore. They're both water and land animals. Then we start to move up. There is a progression into small mammals and then larger mammals, etc., reptiles, etc. So as these animals try to escape the flood and they're moving to higher ground, the waters kept getting deeper and deeper in successive stages. There were about 7 major stages of in the geologic record where the waters transgressed over the land, receded, and then went back again and transgressed again. There's about 7 cycles of that, which we could trace worldwide. And because of these cycles, and you have the various animals of the different ecosystems trying to escape the waters, they were buried progressively. So there is a somewhat of an order of aggression, but within that, what you're not told is there is this chaotic mixture of land animals and marine animals found all over the earth, as you would expect, because they were inundated by high velocity, high energy waters of the flood. So there is somewhat of a vague order of fossils in the record, but within it is many contradictions or mixtures actually found in the fossil record, as you would expect in the catastrophic conditions. Now, regarding whether you mentioned, well, how about Sal giving us an example of animals buried with the dinosaurs? Okay, how come we don't find all these different animals buried with the dinosaurs? We do. We do. You've been deceived. It has been shown by geologists, creation geologists, not just talked about, an arm wave, photographed, verified, videotaped. All the major museums of the world do not exhibit all the different animals that are found with the dinosaurs. The dinosaur exhibits, when you go to look at it, you see dinosaurs. And that's it. There are hundreds, not a few examples, not 5, not 10, not 50, not even 100. There are hundreds of various plants and animals that are alive and well on the earth today. The same genus and species can be identified buried with the dinosaurs. I mentioned that many of these fossils are a mixture, right, of marine and land animals. But let's talk about the dinosaurs. Within the layers of the dinosaurs, there are in the museums, buried in their treasuries in the back, on their racks and racks are of animals and plants, modern day animals, plants of every kind of variety of trees and plants. I mean, ducks and pigeons and penguins and all kinds of animals buried with the dinosaurs, showing that there is no evolution. Now, if they showed those in the museums, you would look, on the one hand, you'd say, okay, I see the dinosaurs. I see these other animals. If they showed them, Well, how come there's no evolution? These dinosaurs are dated here at 100 million years old, but these are modern animals buried with them. There's been no evolution in all of that so-called time. Oh, there's something isn't right here. That's why they don't show it, because you start thinking that the dinosaurs just went extinct. The extinction is not biologic evolution. There are many different types of animals and plants that we see in the fossil record that we no longer have on the earth today. They went extinct, but that has nothing to do with evolution. They couldn't cope with the change in the environment and different conditions, right? But with those are animals and plants that we have today, which exhibit no evolution. I've in the past recommended certain books you could read and see where these plants and animals have been photographed in the museums, but they're not out on display. They're not on display. So there are much contradictory evidence to the idea that these that modern day plants and animals, we call them living fossils, we find them throughout the geologic record. So let me just add this here, that about 15, 20 years ago, or maybe a little more, there was documented about perhaps 500 living fossils. They're fossils that are found deep down and throughout the fossil record, which we find today, the same genus and species basically today living on the earth, indicating no evolution. We've identified in the museums. In my book, I showed you a whole bunch of them that you could find in a museum in Germany. But now, 10, 15 years later, this is not much time. We're now at a point where there's hundreds and hundreds. They're in the thousands. Thousands of living fossils have been identified in the so-called deep down geologic record, which are identical to what is living today. Even when you go on the Facebook, almost every day there are people showing you fossils that are found in the fossil record, which have shown no evolution because they're alive and well today. And the one example I gave you was the single cell organisms that are so-called found at 3.5 billion years down in the geologic record, but there's been no evolution. We find them today on the surface of the earth in places doing well. And these are stromatolites. They form algal mats in the fossil record, and they are growing in places on the earth today. No evolution for so-called 3.5 billion years of the record.
Wow, Sal, that was an excellent answer. And like you said, a lot of those points you just put forth for our audience, those listening, those are points that they won't be taught in public schools. They're not going to be taught that from...
No, because they're contradictory.
Right.
As those two paleontologists said, well, this fossil record is contradictory. Contradictory to what? To the scenario, to the evolutionary scenario.
Even in children's books, you'll see the age of the dinosaurs, right? My kids, they love dinosaurs. And when you see a dinosaur book or a kid's textbook, the dinosaur section, all you ever see are representation of dinosaurs, but you don't see. Yeah, and you don't see what you're putting forth
in the museum,
living fossils. Yeah,
in the museums, in the textbooks, in the photographs, in the videos. You go to Jurassic Park, I mean, the movies,
Age of the Reptile.
That's all you see.
And we did a series with Dr. Carl Werner, who has done a lot of study on living fossils, and he pointed out that he's discovered representative examples from all of the major Animophyla living today and all of the major plant divisions living today with dinosaurs mixed in layers that you don't see represented in museums. And so a lot of people simply don't know about all of even the mammals. You know, you can find living with dinosaurs mammals that look very similar to squirrels, possums, hedgehogs, beavers,
I
duck-billed
know.
platypus.
And why aren't they showing that to you?
It doesn't fit the narrative.
Deception. Let's call a spade, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's deception, because if they showed you and you looked at it in the museum, you would start thinking for yourself, there's something is not right here.
They're not teaching you how to think. They're teaching you what to think. And so if they give an accurate representation of what we actually find in the fossil record, in the geological rock strata, it might get you to second guess the naturalistic theory of origins that's being presented. And I think you nailed it when you said there's a general order that's a reflection of the flood and the rising waters over the year-long flood period, but also a lot of contradictions within there. So it's not as orderly as the evolutionists or proponents of common descent will argue, or what you'll see in the fossil record, where it's just a complete,
or what they show you
pattern
on the diagrams.
Right.
And the diagrams, what they show you there is like a perfect order. The world, that's not what we find in the fossil record. You know, you could go to Dinosaur National Park and see all these disarticulated, huge dinosaur bones, but in there are clams.
You're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I went to the Sonoran Desert Museum in the Tucson area. I think it was Tucson, Arizona, many years ago. I went with my wife to visit. It's a wonderful outdoor museum. It's called an Outdoor Museum of Natural History. And they had in a case, a glass case there, fossil that has evolved over time from one living organism to another. Now, I forgot what it was. It was some kind of a, I'm not sure if it was a mammal or some kind of a reptile. I think it was a reptile. They showed you the evolution of this reptile over millions of years in this glass case from one form to another. And I'm looking at that glass case there, and it's, you know, it's all signed up, and this is evolution, and this is how this animal, this reptile has evolved over 1 million years, or whatever it was, 2 million years. So, and it had all the transition forms. And I'm looking closely and I go, those are all cast iron. Those are not fossils. You know? I'm not saying Pam, that's my wife. All these transitions, I think it was made out of like cast iron or something, you know. I go, those are not fossils. They're trying to show you the evolution of this creature over 1 million years, and all it is imagination.
Right. Yeah.
We don't have any transition fossils that show a continuous spectrum of evolution anywhere on the earth. There's a few of them, maybe a dozen or so, that have been proposed, and they have one or two of the so-called transitions. Well, it went from here to here. Show me the line of transition in the fossils. Show me, you know, the sequence. Nowhere is there a sequence of transition of fossil, of any fossil on the earth. The whale fossils are a joke. They've been pointed out. The transition of the whales are an absolute, I mean, it's a tragedy. It's a deception. The transition is a make-believe deception.
We could argue, like you said, over a dozen proposed examples. But if deep time evolution were true, if fish to fisherman evolution was true, there should be no question, no debate. There should be tens of thousands of proposed examples, not just a few that we could argue about all day. I want to see an example of the transition from single cell to multi-cell to fish to amphibian to reptile, then to whale. I want to see that series because that's ultimately what
if it were true, the shelves on the museums and the displays would be overwhelmed
right.
with transitions. It would look like the Star Wars programs. I showed a few programs back, all these transitions from the Star Wars,
Right.
If evolutionary transitions were true, which many of them go into dead ends, so-called dead ends, and the evolution stopped, right? You have all these dead end transitions and such. It should look like Star Wars creatures all over the earth in the fossil record and alive today.
That's right. It's a great point. Evolutionists hope, dream, and imagine that whales and banana plants are related through common ancestry, Sal. And so notice this, right from all throughout the conventional literature, this backs up what you're saying in your fantastic answer there. Notice this, how much of the fossil record is marine organisms? The vast majority, estimated at over 95% of the fossil record, is comprised of marine organisms. And the conditions, right, the factors associated with that is exactly what we would expect from a worldwide flood. But out of curiosity, I was wondering, how complete or incomplete is the fossil record? And what do they say? The fossil record is considered vastly incomplete, with estimates suggesting that only a small percentage, potentially less than 5% of all species are represented. So therefore, Sal, if you could answer this question, aren't guardians of common descent therefore premature in their arguments or challenges to us as creationists? Why does the fossil record show so convincingly to them progressive evolution from fish to fisherman, bacteria to biologist, but yet the fossil record itself is vastly incomplete? To me, this would be like having a puzzle that comprises 1,000 pieces and all you have are 50 pieces. So you have the 50 pieces. Now you're going to guess what the entire picture looks like that comprises 1,000 pieces. There's so much missing data that the conclusions you make based on what the entirety of the puzzle looks like, you're probably going to be wrong because there's going to be a lot of guesswork involved in that. Is that right, Sal?
Yes, that's true to an extent, but what we do find in the fossil record contradicts the evolutionary scenario. The 50 pieces that we do find contradict.
Yeah, good point.
In other words, if you're told that this puzzle, if you had all the pieces, would look like the Mona Lisa at the Louvre in France, but all the pieces you have nothing to do with human beings. The 50 pieces. In other words, it doesn't even make sense. So
right.
What we do have, what we can examine of the pieces point to a contrary scenario to millions of years of Earth history.
Yeah, it would be like the 50 pieces you have are pieces of things you'd see in Star Trek, spaceships and that which is futuristic. And then somebody comes along and guesses, well, once we get the full puzzle, this is going to be a picture of, some Western scenario from a couple hundred years ago. It's like, no, they didn't have spaceships back then. So already there's a contradiction. And that's what we see in terms of the puzzle pieces that we do have. So that's a great point, Sal.
Well, also, that's what I tried to point out over the last tonight and in the previous one that we did about a month or two ago, that the idea of evolutionary time is prehistoric, right? It's not even historic. Historic means you have records of it, right? You study history. We can't take Abraham Lincoln and reproduce him in a lab, but we do have a lot of records that could possibly convince you that he was a previous president of the United States. We do have records that you could examine. Now, we can't, by the scientific method, reproduce him and bring him back, right? But we do have historical records. But 99% of everything you're told past 5,000 years, between 5,000 years and 500 million years, is prehistoric. In other words, there's no records. All we have is the evidence to examine. And the evidence says if you really look at it with an open mind, that the entire fossil record and life itself, all organisms, did not evolve without plan, purpose, or design, did not evolve without plan, purpose, and design. That they were designed and created by God, and the record does not show that it occurred randomly over millions of years of Earth history.
Sal, fantastic point. Have a look at this, brother. I think this shows the logical inconsistency of their challenge when they want to be hyper specific. Oh, why don't we find a human with a megalodon? Or why don't we find a human with a mosasaur or something like that? They want to be really specific. A dinosaur with an elephant. Well, here's something that I think is curious and shows how illogical their challenge is. The coelacanth, for example. They say that the coelacanth first appeared in the rock strata, I believe 400 to 420 million years ago in the Devonian. So let's see right here. 400 million years ago. But it's thought to have gone extinct over 65 million years ago. Okay, that's interesting. So they largely think they went extinct. That means, so 400 plus million years, but went extinct 65 million years. That means you have tens of millions of years of fossil representation, if you're going to assume the uniformitarian or actualist timeline style, representation of coelacanth. And then all of a sudden it goes extinct. So there's no fossil representation at all for all that assumed time. But yet today we find coelacanth, an amazing example of a living fossil, swimming around the seas today. Okay, so what does that mean? That means coelacanth, if you're following me, has coexisted with what? With T-Rex, with human beings, with whales. I mean, sometimes you find evolutionists challenging us to say, why don't we find whales with an ichthyosaur? Or why don't we find whales with a mosasaur or megalodon? It's like, well, wait a minute. We don't find whales and coelacanth buried together in the fossil record, but we know that they coexisted because guess what? They exist today in the ocean. So isn't it illogical, therefore, or a weak challenge, Sal, to just point to two random organisms and say, oh, this contradicts creation because we don't find them together. But there's a whole lot of organisms we don't find together, like coelacanth and whales or coelacanth and humans, but yet we know that they existed together because they exist together today. Sal, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, because they're disregarding the fact that various organisms have gone extinct.
Right.
And extinction does not imply evolution. We don't find some of these organisms today on the Earth because they've gone extinct. In fact, the fossil record is much more prolific in the variety of types of organisms than we have on the Earth today. Why is that? Because many of them have gone extinct over a period of time. They couldn't handle the changes in the environment, and so we just don't see those organisms. But in other places, like you said, we do find the same fossils in the deeper, so-called older, deeper layers of the fossil record that are alive and well today, indicating there has been no evolution,
right,
of those organisms in all this so-called time.
Isn't it funny that because their argument, which is a rescue device, they'll say, well, that creature didn't change for tens of millions or hundreds of millions of years because it was just so suited to its environment. It didn't need to change, environmental stasis. But isn't it funny that in all that time with coelacanth, basically looking the same, little bit of variation, you have the evolution of a primate to a monkey, an ape to a human. These massive changes all in the same period of time that something like a coelacanth or a horseshoe crab just stayed the same. I mean, that's pretty wild to think about, isn't it, Sal?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an illogical conclusion that they come to, that that organism existed in an environment that hasn't changed for, say, 200 million years. The environment is constantly changing. And, what environment, where would that be? I mean, the coelacanth's in an ocean today. So
yeah,
you say it hasn't changed. It hasn't evolved. All these organisms that we find that are so-called living organisms, living fossils, were in a perfect environment that never changed. Well,
yeah, and
where would that be?
And what's interesting is we find whales in the ocean today, coelacanth in the oceans today. So they coexist, they have coexisted. But yet, if you actually go to the fossil record and you were to make conclusions based on just the fossil record, guess what you don't find together? Whales and coelacanths.
Let me go out on a limb here. I normally don't usually do this on your program. I try to stick with the evidence that has been found, that has been published, that I could show you with references, etc. But let me just talk about some things that I've seen myself over time. Now, there are places in the world where we do find evidence of human beings with dinosaurs, because you hear that all the time. Well, how come we don't find any human fossils with dinosaurs? Well, we do have evidence of human beings with fossils, with dinosaurs. There are human footprints right alongside in the same strata at various places on the earth, right alongside with the footprints of the dinosaurs. Now, I have a replica of one of those in my house, one of those human footprints, replica from the actual fossil footprint found in the same strata with various different kinds of dinosaurs. But these human footprints are found at various places on the earth. I'm not the only one. They've been seen by other geologists and photographed and documented, but you will never see that in the textbooks. They will never tell you about that in the museums. Right. They cannot, because it is contradictory to the evolutionary deception. But there are human footprints. Now, let me go one step further. There are actually human remains have been found in the same type of rock strata that we find dinosaurs in. Now, they weren't right next to each other like the fossil human footprints are found right next to some of the dinosaur footprints. But there have been human remains, fossilized remains of humans found in a few places that I'm aware of by competent geologists that I know personally. And he has sent me the pictures of them and the photographs of human remains found in the Morrison Formation in Utah, which is the same formation which we pull out many dinosaur bones from. There are human remains that have been found in the same type of rock strata where we find dinosaurs. And I've seen pictures of them, and I don't want to show you those pictures on here because I haven't myself actually gone there and touched them, but I know I received them from competent geologists that I know of. And there have been found cases of that. My father went to the Museum of Natural History. This was probably, I don't know, my father has passed away now, but I'm going to say when he did this, he was young. He went to the Museum of Natural History in New York, and says at that time they had on display what they called an Indian, the remains of an Indian, which is, our native, what we consider a Native American today, but a fossilized human remain that was completely coalified. That means turned to coal. Now we have fossils that are coalified today, and the coal beds are dated at in the 300 million year range. Now he says when he went to the museum, there was a coalified human person on display, but as long since, who knows where they put it. You know, at the Museum of Natural History. Okay. So there have been human remains found in so-called deep time, ancient strata that go back millions of years, but you're not going to see those in museums and such. And I'll give you one other example. You could take it or leave it for what it's worth. But when I was a teenager, a youngster, I walked in a quarry in New Jersey. I won't mention the name of it. It's a quarry. You could, if I did mention the name, you could look it up by name. A famous quarry in which we found coelacanths. The rocks in the quarry were dated as Triassic, in other words, during the age of the dinosaurs, with a coelacanth. I think it was one of the first finds of this coelacanth fish that they claimed is now extinct, but is alive and well. Okay. So in the same rocks that's dated as during the Triassic, the age of the reptiles with dinosaurs, as when I was a youngster and I walked in there with my brother and his friends, we saw what we were certain were human footprints.
Wow.
And they have since demolished that quarry. They've demolished that quarry. And I went back there about 20 years ago. This picture of me as a geologist, you see on your thumbnail, was taken when I went back to that quarry. What remained of it? There was only about 5% of the rock outcrops of that quarry still in existence. And I went back to see if I could find those human footprints. Now, of course, I had a very, very small chance because 98% of the quarry was gone. But I know, and my brother could attest to that, and his friends, that we saw. Now, we were not paleontologists at the time. We were just young kids, but we could pretty much identify a human footprint. Okay.
Right.
And with our eyes, we saw human footprints in the same rock as dated as during the age of the reptiles, but the quarry is now completely been leveled. I went back to see if by some chance I could possibly find them again, but with 98% of the quarry gone, what I was remaining to examine, I couldn't find anything, but I know that I've seen them.
Right. From personal experience. And wow, that's fascinating evidence right there. And from personal experience. And so
I couldn't present it as evidence to you.
Right. But it's a personal anecdote that what you saw.
I know what I saw. My brother knows what he saw. His friend knows. We all said, I remember when we were kids, I still remember it. We looked at it and said, oh my goodness, somebody, some person was walking on these rocks long ago. You know what I mean? They were now in, solid rock. We could see, we said, oh, there's a person was walking here. Well, we didn't know anything about paleontology or geology, but I know that quarry was dated as Triassic rocks.
Wow. Well, there's a place called the Ashley Phosphate Beds, this enormous phosphate graveyard that it's purported to have contained mixed remains of humans with ichthyosaurs, hadrosaurs, plesiosaurs, sharks. And so there's not a whole lot of information out there. So I typically don't use it. But the information that is out there, I haven't really seen a real strong rebuttal to it that showcases all these supposed ancient creatures and extant creatures plus humans mixed together, just
Yes.
one big giant.
Yes, those fossil beds are on record. The fossils that was contained with them are on records of reports, but you will never see that in a textbook. They never told me that when I was majoring as a geologist to get my master's degree. They never told me that.
I could see the evolutionists using a rescue device, like, well, this is an intrusion. Perhaps one of the dinosaur or hadrosaur or plesiosaur fossils intruded into a layer with modern animals somehow due to tectonic shifts, or, they've always got a story, right, Sal? But nonetheless, it's examples like that address their challenge. But
Right.
then what do? They invoke a rescue device or a story to explain it away.
Right. The human remains that were found in the Morrison Formation by a person I know personally, a geologist. He sent me the photographs and all, and they're found in situ. That means embedded in the rock. They were not remains of people that tunneled down through the rock. In other words, there's no evidence of tunneling in a cave that they died in. They're just as encased in the rock like any other dinosaur bone. They're called in situ. They're in place. No evidence whatsoever examining the whole area around them that these human remains just fell into a crevasse or a hole or something, or in a cave or anything like that. They're just buried in the Morrison Formation like any other dinosaur bone. And they're obviously human remains. There's something like 6 individuals.
Wow. And so if you're going into as an evolutionary scientist, so you have evolutionary based presuppositions, and you're looking for various fossils in these fossil graveyards, but you're finding the remains of, let's say, dinosaurs, which they believe are millions of years ago. And so for that reason, couldn't they miss the possibility of finding, a human fossilized phalange or a human fossilized bone? Or even if they do find it, that they either disregard it or say that it got in there by some other means, because they have those presuppositions. So how many have gone ignored or simply thrown into the museum in the basement or something like that because it doesn't fit their narrative, Sal?
Yeah, I'm sure they're if we dig deep enough, we would find examples like that.